My name is Bartholomew. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, best-selling author, and keynote speaker. I primarily work with professional athletes, members of the special forces community, and also corporations in elite environments, whether that's the technology sector or whether that's professional sporting organizations or even universities. How I got into coaching is a little bit different than most people's journey. A lot of people get into coaching, they were former athletes, really enthusiastic about strength training or performance, and they jump right into it. My story was a little darker. At 14 years old, well, really at 15, I was hospitalized for a year of my life. I had suffered from depression. A lot of my friends that I grew up playing sports with had gotten into hardcore drugs, methamphetamines, coke, just a lot of hardcore stuff that wasn't your usual teenage Friday night. At the same time, my parents were still really going back and forth. They had a pretty nasty divorce. And it was tough for me because every other night I was switching my mother's house, my dad's house, and there were just a lot of changes going on in my life. Now, boo-hoo, right? That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is ultimately what got me into coaching was getting lost and pulling myself out of a dark place. When I had lost my social circle, when my parents and things at home were just going through their own struggles and hardships, all I wanted to do was escape. So I channeled every bit of energy I had as a former competitive athlete into training. I mean, at the time, I didn't know it. I was really depressed, and I was looking for any source of control in my life. And I would read every fitness magazine, every bit of information I could about diet, nutrition, training. And the problem was, at the time, I didn't know how to discern what was good and what was bad advice. I just followed it all. So here I am, 15 years old, eating egg beaters, fat-free cheese, and turkey bacon for breakfast. I'm lifting weights after school. I'm lifting after dinner. I'm doing Christian Bale-style American Psycho sit-ups and crunches at night. And what I didn't realize is I had developed my own kind of drug addiction. Even though I wasn't doing the things that my friends at the time were doing, I was digging a hole that I had no idea how to get out of. Eventually, I was hospitalized. I had gone from 130 pounds as a normal, healthy freshman, sophomore in high school to under 90 pounds at its worst. And I wasn't trying to get cut. I wasn't trying to get ripped, anything like that. It just became an outlet. I wanted control. And so eventually when the doctor, looked at my parents and said, your son's heart is not in a good place. It's around 39 beats per minute. His body's literally cannibalizing itself. Liver and kidney are near shutdown or failure. I was put into an inpatient eating disorder hospital in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this drove me crazy because to me, I didn't have an eating disorder. I felt like I was angry and I was depressed. I didn't know how to handle all these changes. And really what I was obsessed with was almost being perfect. I thought that, I saw all these things that angered me around me, friends that were flaky, people that couldn't stay committed to one another. And I thought, I'm just going to channel this. Now, when I was hospitalized, that's when the journey really started. You were woken up in this hospital and every day started the same for me, at least for the first few weeks. My blood was drawn. I was stripped naked and put in a gown. I was weighed. I couldn't shower for the first 2 weeks because they thought the initial shock of hot or cold would send me into cardiac arrest because my heart was so weak. Your activity was controlled. You spent the majority of the day in a day room, small little room surrounded by plexiglass, where nurses, doctors, therapists, dietitians would literally observe you as if you were some kind of caged animal. Now, they wanted to control for any eating disorder behaviors, any kind of behavior that they considered abnormal, which the laundry list could have been in a book. If you fidgeted, if you stood up, if you did anything that they perceived to be, you're burning too many calories, you're trying to be active. It was absurd. You would get one warning. You get a second warning, then they'd make you drink a meal replacement like a Boost or an Ensure. You got a third warning, right? And you denied altering your behavior. You were fed intravenously. It didn't take long to realize that it felt less like a hospital where people were trying to help other people and more like a prison. You were never able to leave this space. You were on the 8th floor of this hospital. When you ate, because they wanted to reintroduce food and everything to people that had suffered from bulimia, and some people had just been, the things that they had done to their body was incredible. You were put into this kitchen where you ate at a glass table, also observed by nurses. And if you didn't finish every single plate or every single thing on your plate, let's say you had mashed potatoes and gravy, you'd have to lick the gravy clean. You'd have to do stuff that was almost considered punitive. Now, mind you, this is a place where people, subject matter experts with so many degrees behind their name that you would think it's alphabet soup, are dedicated to trying to help others, but they didn't really know what made them tick. What you learn is all they saw were symptoms. They didn't see people. These professionals were socially skewed instead of socially skilled. And through observing them, you also saw that it was really a lion's den of manipulation. A lot of the nurses, the power dynamics between them and the doctors and other people, the way they talked down to a lot of the patients. And for the longest time, I would just observe. One, because I felt like I didn't belong there at the time. Again, I felt like I'm a teenage kid. I have some anger and I have some depression. I didn't realize the things I was doing to my body. I was so focused on what everybody else was doing and trying to figure that out. Man, isn't this person odd? Isn't that person odd? And I didn't really look at myself. And what was really tricky is I was a minor at the time. So no matter what I witnessed behind the scenes, no matter what kind of toxic behavior I was exposed to, my parents wouldn't believe me. They wouldn't get me out of that hospital because all they saw was a sick child. So eventually, weekly you'd have to meet with a therapist. You'd have to meet with a psychologist. And after going to 3 or 4 of them, because they'd always want to evaluate you. And if you didn't say exactly what they wanted to hear, you would get a check mark in a non-compliant box and you'd basically be trapped even longer. Eventually, I found a therapist that really realized this isn't the place for you. They saw the effect the toxic environment was having on me. Now, mind you guys, again, this was a place that some people died because at the end of the day, even though they were in this controlled environment, their behavior wasn't changed. These people couldn't get through to them. People that were paid to help people going through crisis, who had an illness, who were suffering from something, couldn't get across to these individuals because they just saw treatment-oriented symptoms. The therapist eventually convinced my parents and some of the other staff, this isn't the place for him. But before I left, there were 2 things that I did. One day I had gained enough weight that they said, we'll let you leave the hospital. Now, mind you, I spent my 16th birthday in this hospital. My 16th birthday, I hadn't left it in over a year. And I stole 2 books. I'm not proud of this. I'm just telling you the truth. I sold 2 books. One was on strength and conditioning, which I didn't know much about at the time. And one was on nutrition. And I hid them in the book jackets of some other books because the hospital would rifle through all your stuff to make sure that you weren't reading anything related to diet, training, or nutrition. Now, my last few nights in that hospital, I read those books as fast as possible. I wanted to learn everything I could about how to properly train my body, how to properly get back from a nutrition standpoint so I could get on with my life. I got out, and within the next 3 months, I gained over 50 pounds, was able to reclaim my health, and really started speaking to other people about things like depression, eating disorders, even performance, as I started to learn more about these things. I eventually went on and got my undergraduate degree in kinesiology. I got a master's degree in exercise science with an emphasis in motor learning. And then that was when I really understood there's so much more to strength and conditioning. There's so much more to working with people in any field than just this skill set that we see or we utilize every day. For me, that's training, that's being in the weight room, teaching speed and agility. The most important skill you learn and the most important skill anybody can have is communication. Because when I got out of that hospital, I realized it's not enough just to get my body back to a state of health. I have to learn what makes other people tick. Because I remember that when I walked out of that hospital, there was a nurse, and she was one of the most toxic nurses in that place. And she looked at me, and I was 16 at the time, and she said, "You'll be back, I promise you." And I looked her direct in the eye and said, "You're right, I will be back to speak to everybody else that you weren't able to help because you're so caught up in your own nonsense and the politics of this place." So that's why I got into strength and conditioning. I wanted to help people understand how to push their body, how to do these things the right way, because I wish I had had that information. And I knew to do that, I needed to learn what makes them tick, because not everybody's the same. Doesn't mean they're all delicate flowers. It doesn't mean you have these little sit downs moments with them and you get warm and fuzzy. It just means at the end of the day, if you don't understand psychology, you don't understand yourself, you don't have self-awareness, and you don't have a trade craft that you're ruthlessly committed to, you're never going to be able to help as many people as you think you are. That's my story. So if after hearing this story, you're somebody that can relate to its message, maybe you've gone through struggles of your own, maybe you've helped somebody else that has gone through some struggle, it doesn't matter how big or small, and you want to find ways to improve as a communicator, a leader, a teacher, a guide, a mentor, that's what we're going to discuss on this channel. And I want to hear more from you as to what struggles you deal with. What are topics you want to have explored? Anything that you have. Because a point as a coach or a guide or a professional of any kind at the end of the day is you've got to be able to make what you do matter to the other person. Even communication is about the listener. So I hope you guys subscribe. We're going to talk about a lot of cool things on this channel, whether it's training, whether it's leadership, even some business stuff. But everything we do is going to be focused on how we can reach a bigger audience, make a greater impact, and ultimately help more people down the road.